right, good morning, everyone. Um, my name is John Overman with Cambridge Systematics. I'm joined by Paula Reeves from the Washington State Transportation Commission, who will be giving a couple intro slides in a minute. If you're just joining us, we are using Zoom webinar format today, and that means that we're likely upgrading most of you to become panelists, and all that means is you get more access to the Zoom controls. You can mute, unmute, go on video if you want, use the chat functions. So we'd love for you to join as a panelist, just so you can utilize those features of Zoom. But that's why we've set it up today. I'll make one more reminder about that when we get into the Zoom controls, but I just wanted to make that note before we get started. So again, I'm John Overman, the project manager supporting the commission on this project. I have a few colleagues on the line as well, supporting from Cambridge Systematics, as well as our outreach partner Enviro Issues. And with that, I'll kick it over to Paula to introduce the meeting today.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. And thank you, Lois, for reaching out and encouraging folks in your region to attend. Hopefully you'll have an opportunity to make a few announcements about your region. I just would like to take a quick minute and introduce you to the Transportation Commission for those of you not familiar with them. Next slide, please. So the Transportation Commission is an independent citizen body of 7 members that are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. There are 3 members from the east side of the mountains, and you all may know Kelly Fukai, and 4 from the west side. And all of them have spent their careers and their life work in transportation, ranging in work in public transportation, technology, ports, labor, and other areas. Next slide. A bit about their role quickly. They have a broad role in statute. Let's see here. I just wanted to mention their role quickly. They are the policy and finance advisors to the governor and legislature. They make recommendations each year, usually in the form of an annual report and other documents. They serve as a state tolling authority, adopting highway and bridge tolls and setting ferry fares for Washington state ferries. They provide, probably their most important function is providing a public forum for transportation policy development. And they do that by holding 11 meetings across the state each year. We just finished up a meeting in Edmonds, and we'll be in Cheney in June and Chelan in July. They conduct legislatively directed research and projects. And last, I'll mention that they author this state 20-year transportation plan known as WTP, Washington Transportation Plan. And Jonathan's going to talk a lot more about that, and I'll turn it over to him with that.
Thank you, Paula. So again, welcome to the meeting this morning. Thanks to Lois and SRTC for helping to publicize the event today. I'll be going over the agenda right now, and then some more kind of introductions about the purpose and the scope of the meeting today. So we're going to do a quick round of welcome. We'll ask you to rename yourself in your Zoom profile if you can. We'll give you an overview of the WTP update and why we're here today. We'll spend most of the meeting on the state's long-range planning priorities, as well as challenges and opportunities. And this is a section of the meeting today that we hope will be more of a interactive kind of workshop. We'll be using Mentimeter polling, so you'll be able to contribute feedback and respond to questions via your phone or web browser, and then opportunities for group discussion. So please, we'll be asking some probing questions, but please feel free to engage with others, respond to some of the comments that you see, but let's keep it respectful. Let's focus on the ideas. And then finally, we'll close out with some next steps and other updates. So I've mentioned a couple times that we're using Zoom webinar today. So if you have received a panelist invitation to join as a panelist, that just means that you're representing a transportation stakeholder, an agency, a public agency, or private company. So please accept that so that you can have access to the chat. And there, in that you can use the rename function to add your agency. So click on the participant link, find your name, and you can add your agency there. You'll have options to raise your hand, to mute, unmute. You can also use the Q&A or the chat. So those listening in from the public can use the Q&A function, and anyone as a panelist can see those questions. Also, if you want to provide a comment, you can email those comments to transc@wstc.wa.gov, and we're happy to have those comments about the plan now and in the future. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be using Mentimeter, which is similar to Poll Everywhere if you've used that at a meeting before. And so I'm going to ask you all to get out your smartphone, get a web browser, and type in menti.com. Or if you have access to the chat, I think we can put a link in the chat to get you directly to that quiz. And we're going to be using the same code, the same quiz throughout the meeting today. There will be some multiple choice questions. There'll be some short answer questions, some ranking questions. So keep that browser open, and when I tell you, we'll go on to the next question. And so give you a minute to go to menti.com and enter 18245316, or you can click on the link in the chat. So we'll start off with a little pop quiz. So I'll flash the 2 questions on the screen so you can read them here. But the first question you'll see is, in 2023, there were roughly 8 million people living in Washington State. How much did it increase since 2000? And what's the expected growth by 2050?
Keep you working today throughout this session. Lots of quizzes.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of quizzes. So if you are multitasking, I'll definitely flag the times when we want your feedback, and we hope that you can kind of contribute in the dialogue as well. Okay, so I will go to this slide, and I know you can all see the results populate in real time, so hopefully other answers aren't swaying yours, but see, we've got some good responses so far. Okay, so you all know your state. The majority of you chose growth of 2 million and additional 2 million by 2050, and that's correct. There were about 6 million people in 2000, and they're projected to be about 10 million by 2050. So this is just a way to kind of get you thinking about the future, right? We're going to be talking a lot about the future in the call today. Another way to think about the future is to look back at the past. How much has changed since 2010? There were roughly 140,000 battery electric vehicles registered in the state last year. How many were there in 2010? It's not updating on my end as fast as your end. Well, I can see the current scores. You see most people chose 543. These are all very low numbers, so it's a hard quiz. The number is actually 79. So quite a huge growth, obviously, from 2010 to 2023. And this just shows that how fast things are changing with respect to technology. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So thank you for entertaining us with the quiz. I'll pause here. I'm going to give an overview of the WTP, but I wanted to offer either Lois or Eve, if you want to share any words. We didn't give you that opportunity at the very beginning. There's also going to be a time at the end where other agencies can offer updates, but did you want to jump in now or say something at the end of the meeting? Okay, well, there,
Yeah,
I see Lois unmuting.
You know, sometimes, Jonathan, it takes more than one click to get off mute.
For sure.
I want to thank you all for showing up here in the region, at least virtually. I'm Lois Bolenbach. I'm the director of SRTC, and I think most of you on the line know me and we know each other well. But I just want to let folks know that there are a variety of things that we're working on right now that are important to the region. And I want to take the opportunity to just share a couple of those. We're just starting up a smart mobility plan to really investigate the opportunities to identify transportation technologies and be ready to advance those technologies so that we can get the most out of the system that we have in place. We're also, I'm going to say, about 80% through the analysis of safety in this area to develop a safety action plan that covers the entirety of the Spokane region, which is really important because before we did not have complete coverage of that information. And that'll allow all of our local government partners to access both state funds and federal funding programs that are available for safety. To make sure that our system is functioning well, we have two plans going on. One is a congestion management plan where we look at the areas of congestion on our highway system and we try to address those bottlenecks. We also are developing or going to begin work on a resiliency plan where we look at challenges that might occur when we have, for example, wildfires or a major incident on the freeway. How do we make sure that travel still can continue and we can get back to normal as quickly as possible? And so all of this type of work supports the direction of SRTC and the region and will help feed into our long-range planning process that will start next year. And the success of all of this work really relies on our partnerships. So whether you work for Spokane Transit or the Department of Transportation, of course, all of our member governments, as well as the community at large, organizations like bicycle advocacy groups or folks that advocate for the disabled or veterans, our partners in the business community at GSI or any of the chambers. We really encourage and welcome your support. If you don't know us, please get to know us. Because your voice is really important in the decisions that we make. So thank you for giving me some time, Paula, to plug SRTC and our work. And thanks to everybody who joined us today.
Thank you, Lois. I also just wanted to thank Commissioner Fukai for being with us this morning and, welcome your comments as we head into this listening session.
Well, thank you, Paula, and I apologize for being a few minutes late. Had some things stack up this morning, but glad to be here with you all. Glad to see so many familiar faces in the audience. And I just really appreciate people's engagement and willingness to participate in this. From the commission standpoint, what we really value is the public's opinion and ideas and thoughts as we start to pull this plan together. So I just really appreciate and I'm grateful for your time and attention to this. It's really important to us. And we're just here to hear from all of you. So thank you.
Great, thank you both. Okay, so I'm going to provide a really brief overview of the Washington Transportation Plan, and then we'll get into the heart of the conversation today. So as Paula mentioned, the Washington Transportation Plan is the state's vision and policy plan. And really the commission, when it was created, was directed by the legislature to create this plan, to update it every 4 years. And you'll notice that the last plan was 2018. And so because of the pandemic, this one is a couple of years delayed. So there's a bit of a lag for this update. And I have this umbrella here, not to show that it's the most important plan in the state, by any stretch of the imagination. It's really to show the coverage. So this plan is intended to cover all jurisdictions, all modes of transportation. That's why we have a wide variety of stakeholders on the call today, representing transit agencies, cities, the DOT, private industry. So this is a multimodal plan, a policy plan. All of your regional plans, your local plans, WashDOT's statewide multimodal plan, as well as the modal plans, are key parts of the overall transportation landscape. And in fact, those plans are going to have more detail on your local needs, on your local projects, and sort of system performance. But the Washington Transportation Plan sets that overarching vision for state transportation. And there are other elements such as priority projects, sort of the project prioritization process that the state uses, that the local and regional entities use. There's implementation of projects, there's the performance management. So a lot of those are generally in the local, the regional, the statewide kind of operator plans. But this WTP has the opportunity to sort of collect a lot of the best ideas, the overarching strategies and actions that can help advance the goals of the whole state. So it's a bit top down, but it's also bottoms up. We want to hear from you all about your priorities, what's working, what's not working in your region, so that we can kind of build this plan from each part of the state. So the scope of our work on the technical team, as well as with the commission staff, is highlighted here. It's really to establish that 20-year vision, as I mentioned, for all modes and jurisdictions. It's going to build on the 6 statewide transportation system goals that we'll talk about in subsequent slides. Previous work. So the WTP 2040, which is the currently adopted plan, you can see the link to that plan here if you're not familiar with it. So it's going to build on that plan and some of the good ideas that came from that plan of 6 years ago, but really be updated to address the current priorities, to update to the current legislative priorities, as well as your local and regional priorities. So in order to do that, we're having our first round of outreach to understand those challenges and opportunities, those priorities from each part of the state, and then moving through into the recommendations, building recommendations to address some of those current challenges and opportunities. So we are about 6 months into the project, and in this first phase of outreach, we're holding 6 of these regional meetings throughout the state. And this is the second one. So if you want to join another meeting, we'll tell you how to register for those meetings as well. It's focused on the greater Spokane area, but you're welcome to join other meetings, and really this is a statewide plan. So with that, just to kind of highlight again other opportunities to contribute to the plan, and this is not all of the opportunities, but just the main phases. We've got our regional meetings occurring right now. We're going to have topic focused meetings, and they'll be focused on these policy pillars, which I'll describe in the next section. And those are likely to happen over the summer. We'll have a second round of regional meetings early in 2025, and then there'll be finally the plan will be adopted towards the end of 2025, and so you'll have opportunity to comment on the final recommendations before it goes to the commission. So just to reiterate what we want to get out of today, we want to gather feedback from you all to help inform the new recommended strategies that are going to go into the plan. So really to understand the challenges, the opportunities, you don't have to come with a specific strategy in mind, but think about what are those key issues? What are the key issues 5 years from now? What are the key issues 20 years from now? And so we can develop a plan that has both those near-term concrete actions, as well as some longer-term, bigger picture strategies. And obviously it's a key directive of this plan to engage with you all, with transportation stakeholders, and there'll be other opportunities for public input as well. Okay, so Now we're going to shift into kind of the meat of the presentation. I'll present a few slides that focus on the statewide priorities, the goals, and these new policy pillars. And then we'll be asking you to provide some feedback on those. So get your Mentimeter code poll ready. It's still in the chat, and we'll have that code on each slide where we're asking for feedback.
You only have to log into Mentimeter one time. So type in the link and type in the code and you're in.
Yep, thanks, Paula. Okay, so this is probably familiar for most of you. These are the state policy goals that were enacted in 2000. There are 6 of them. These goals were updated in 2015, but are unchanged, and they'll be the backbone, or there'll be a key piece of the WTP. So economic vitality, ensuring the transportation system promotes a prosperous economy. We've got preservation, preserving and maintaining the life of the assets, safety and security, obviously key goal, and those 2 have stars next to them because of the highest legislative priorities. We have mobility, both for people and goods. Environment and health covers the quality of life, natural environment, as well as human public health. And then stewardship, which really focuses on making the best use of our resources. So efficient use of resources, and given that there's not unlimited funding to build out transportation projects. So those are the 6 goals. Remember, they're from 2000. So they're still relevant, they're still good. And if you look at most regional transportation plans, you'll see most of these elements covered in some way or another. But also, there are new priorities, there are new policies. And if you look back at the legislature of the last several years, we've got some key major acts and some that impact that have wide-ranging impacts throughout the state. And you've got other bills and legislation that might impact cities more than statewide entities. But some of these emerging policies relate to climate. You've got the Climate Commitment Act. You have other bills that impacted the Growth Management Act, and how cities are looking at their comprehensive plans in terms of multimodal level of service and the climate elements. You've got initiatives around climate and resiliency. You have funding being a big issue. The Move Ahead Washington package was great, offers a lot of resources for capital projects, but there's still a need for more funding for transportation. And one of the commission's projects has been looking at the road user charge as a way to fill that gap. You have the HEAL Act that focuses on environmental justice and equity. You have other changes that are coming from the federal government, so rules around reporting in terms of the GHG reporting. So these are some of the emerging policies and issues that have come up since the last plan, and really could be used to kind of reframe some of how we think about our recommendations in the next WTP. So these are some initial thoughts on potential policy pillars, which can connect those longer term goals or those historic goals to some of the actions that will be recommended in the next WTP. So I'll just read these. There's a lot of words, so I might as well read them. So one policy pillar is around funding. So funding came up in the last WTP, but it wasn't integrated in the recommendations, but long-term funding solutions adequately address current and future transportation maintenance and enhancement needs. We have climate and resiliency, a future transportation system that is resilient, redundant, and helps to mitigate and lessen the impacts of climate change. We have connecting communities. So transportation investments reconnect communities, close gaps in the network, improve access to opportunity, and improve quality of life. Equity and movement. Transportation planning supports historically underrepresented communities in planning processes and outcomes. And finally, transportation technology. So the state is prepared to adapt to new transportation technology in ways that help further our policy goals, including safety. So think about those for a second. I'll flash these again each time we ask a question about them, so you don't have to memorize it. And these words aren't set in stone, and neither are the policy pillars. So we welcome feedback from you all on what's missing, and what you think about these potential policy pillars. So what does that mean in terms of the plan itself? Again, we're just in the first round of outreach, so we're not writing the plan yet, but we don't want to get rid of the transportation system policy goals. We're not going to get rid of those goals, but we can package the recommendations in the plan to address those policy pillars as well as the goals. So this is just illustrative. This is not saying that every transportation technology project is going to address each of the 6 goals. In fact, it might just address 1 or 2. But you can imagine a strategy that is centered on climate, but it also supports safety or stewardship. And so there are opportunities that we can use these new pillars as a lens to help identify those near and long-term strategies that also support the 6 system goals. Just to kind of put a finer point on that. So, excuse me. So here's how it could be used for looking back at some of the 2040 policies in action. So these are 2 examples from the 2040 plan. Again, we're going to relook at all of those strategies and actions and understand the relevance, the current relevance, whether or not to keep them as recommendations. But 2 of them that I've organized into transportation technology and equity and movement. You have incentivized the use of clean technology and energy efficiency in the freight sector. So that is in the environment and health goal in the current WTP. That could be in the transportation technology if we chose to keep that action, and it addresses 3 of the goals: environment and health, economic vitality, and stewardship. You have another policy related could be related to equity. Work to ensure that all people have access to their daily needs with dignity and independence, regardless of their ability or income, and without discrimination based on race or other identity. So that's could be an equity policy and could also relate to mobility, to safety, to environment, health, to stewardship. So that's just an example of how we could, the new recommendations that we come up with through this process could be organized around policy pillars, but still support the goals of the 6 system goals. Okay, so now we're going to turn to get your feedback. So get your Menti polls ready. Again, you can go to the link in the chat or go to menti.com and type in the code 182453116. So there'll be 3 questions on the policy pillars. This first one is just a multiple choice. Do these policy pillars generally capture the top transportation priorities in your region? Yes, no, or partially. And then the next question will ask you to sort of elaborate on that. So you can think about why they do address it, or why they don't, or why they partially address it. So I'll give you a couple of minutes or a minute or so to answer that first easy question, and then we'll move on to the second question.
And I'll just add, if you didn't answer the questions before, you may have to hit skip ahead to the current question at the top of your Menti.
Yeah, if you're having trouble answering the question and won't submit, that probably means you need to skip ahead to the current question.
We are not saving any identifier information, so you can feel free to share your thoughts.
Yeah, for better or worse, we don't know who's saying what, and so there's no connection between your answers, right? So we can't go back and look at if someone said yes and then what the comments were. So it's just a anonymized poll. Okay, so it doesn't update after I click once. So I've got to remember that. So I'll show you the live version, which you all see. We've got most people saying yes, they generally capture the priorities in the region. That's great. One person saying no. So I'm curious to see in the next question, what is the top priority in your region that's not being covered? And 4 partially. I expect a lot of people would probably have some additions to these policy pillars. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So this question is there anything missing from these policy pillars? What would you add or remove? Zero responses so far, so I'm assuming you're all writing long responses. Okay, I'll start sharing these answers. Hopefully you've internalized some of the policy pillars. So you can see these as well. Equity should not be restricted to planning. Absolutely. There's a couple on safety, in connecting communities. I think, if you look at reconnecting communities, the federal grant, a big part of that is safety. It's improving access, but also improving safe access, eliminating some of those safety barriers. Yeah, I agree it's not explicitly identified, but it could be integrated within each pillar. It could warrant a standalone pillar as well. Fatal and serious, so another safety, just kind of supporting some of these, planning for growth. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that one if you're willing in a minute. Metrics for operational effectiveness. Yeah, that's something that's really we've talked a lot about internally, just how to kind of measure progress, what sort of performance metrics WashDoc is tracking, how performance metrics can or should be included in the plan. But I think stewardship really focused on that, at least efficient use of resources. I think mobility often addresses the kind of operational efficiencies of the system, and so maybe that's something that needs to be more explicit in the policy pillars. Multimodal, fully funding maintenance. Okay, there's a lot down here, so I'll scroll through these slowly, but you all can do so on your end as well. Preservation and maintenance funding. Most can be included under existing policies. Multimodal transportation investments should be more balanced. Let's see. Another one, focusing growth. Equity is a broader consideration than just mobility. It would consider updating to transportation equity rather than equity and movement. Okay, it's a good suggestion. Truly sustainable funding. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is save some of these thoughts. You're going to answer one more question, then we can have a group discussion, and I'll be able to share these again. So we'll move on to the next slide, but I'll be able to share your responses and as part of the group discussion. So let's move to the final policy pillar question, which is going to ask you to rank these policy pillars. Again, this is not going to be used to prioritize them anyway in the plan. It's just to get a sense for where your region's priorities are, and that'll be helpful in the next conversation about challenges and opportunities. So go ahead and answer that third question, which is which policy pillar is most important in your region. So you should have a drag and drop option either on your phone or the web browser to rank those. And if there's an other, I definitely want to hear what those others are. I've got some of those in the last question, but I'd like to hear from you either in the chat or verbally on what some of those other priorities are. Okay, here are the responses so far. We've only got 6 in, so I'm assuming there's still some folks dragging them around. Okay, so we've got, let's click to this slide and show you the current results, which you've all seen. The top of the list is sustainable funding. So really, addressing the funding gap, making sure that there's enough resources to address those transportation challenges. Absolutely. And then we have connecting communities, climate and resiliency, equity and movement, transportation technology. Transportation technology is similar to our meeting yesterday, scores the lowest. And I feel like it's becoming kind of a tool and less of a priority, right? It's going to be used to address all these challenges, but I'm not surprised that it's showing up low at the lower end of the priority list. So let's pause for a few minutes for group discussion. What I have is a printout of the questions that you just answered, because we can't back up to them. So I've got all of these here, and curious if anyone wants to chime in on why they put a response, if anything was missing, or if there's if you have any comments on what you put into that second question. I'd love for you to raise your hand, come on audio and share some thoughts, and or if you see something on here that you want to react to, we'd love to hear your feedback. Lois.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. One of the things that I don't see reflected here, but I think is important to consider as you move forward, is not just sustainable funding, but more stable and predictable funding. I think this is a challenge in the industry when we get lots of money and then it gets swept, and then we get lots of money. That's really difficult. We already have a difficult workforce issue to deal with. So some stability over time in funding has been a priority of this MPO for a little while now. So I think that is very closely related to the funding issue, but needs to be a part of that consideration.
That's a great point, Lois. I think that's particularly important when we're talking about maintaining and operating and preserving the system, some sort of consistent, reliable resource.
Yeah, not only with state action, but there's a pretty lively discussion going on at a national level about discretionary versus formula funding. And while everybody loves to get a great big grant, it's hard to plan for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the total dollar amount. It's just kind of knowing that you can plan for that, a consistent amount over time. We've got Mike from WashDOT.
Yeah, just add to what Lois said there. I think that oftentimes people see the word sustainable or the phrase sustainable funding and and equate that to predictable and consistent. So it just might be an added addition to the definition you might. Anyway, the reason I raised my hand is I'm going back to your, and I put a comment in here about if you move forward with kind of your dot matrix of, the goals and how the policy pillars fit into them. I think that the preservation goal, that all of the pillars should be marked for that. And here's the reason why. I think oftentimes in rural parts of the state, we sometimes talk about, it's a low ADT, and so there's this problem with this bridge that's got to be closed, and it's like, so we're going to close a bridge. Well, the one-way detour might be 60 or 80 miles, and so I think it gets into those other policy pillars that didn't have a dot by them. Is that really equity in people's ability to be connected, right? And to get to where they need to be. If a bridge that crosses the Columbia River is closed and they have to drive 80 miles to really only go 3 miles, right? So it's just a recent example here in Eastern Washington where I think it, and if you go forward with that dot matrix slide, I think it just highlights the importance of funding preservation. And then my other thing I wanted to mention is just, I feel we've been having problems with folks being confused that maintenance and preservation are the same thing. And they are not. And they have their own funding sources, at least in the state system. And so anything we can do in this conversation to highlight that they're different things and both need to be fully funded in a sustainable way, because if we can't maintain the system, it drives up the costs of preservation. And if we can't preserve the system, it affects all those other pillars and goals.
Thanks for pointing that out, Mike. We have a slide later on that talks about maintenance and operation as well as preservation. So hopefully we're keeping that clear. And regarding the dot matrix, I think that was, as Jonathan mentioned, that was just a kind of an example. We're still working out the bugs with that. So good points. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I think I could have just filled in the entire matrix, because you could imagine that they all connect to all, and depending on the strategy. So it's certainly just illustrative. I think once we actually have the recommendations, then it'll be easier to say, okay, this particular recommendation does relate to preservation as well as these other goals. But yeah, it's not ready for prime time. Paul?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Paul Kadovich at Highline Grain Growers. I appreciate Mike's comments there. I live in a rural community in the center part of the state, but Highline stretches from Wenatchee to Spokane along Highway 2. And so those, he hits home on things that I hear about quite a bit. I think about stewardship as well as one of those pillars, and maybe preservation and stewardship are similar enough as we're thinking about them. But that was actually why I had my hand raised. I couldn't figure out how to make a comment after I took the poll. We work very closely with WashDOT and the PCC short line rail system, and so what I've recognized over time, I've been involved since 2006 and 7, and the short line system within our state, and it's the PCC system in particular is state owned. Rings all the bells that we're trying to ring. That's mainly why I'm joining here, is I realize that there aren't a ton of rail experts out in transportation, but I'm happy to share what I've learned over my career and how impactful it truly is in something that people can identify rail when they drive by it, but they really don't know how it affects their lives. This shortline system is an integral part, and it addresses all these things in ways that we all want to see. And WashDOT does a fantastic job. That frankly, they're the ones that run point on grant applications. We'll have another one coming up, Chrissy grant in 2024. But I'm here to participate in a conversation about how important that is if it decides, if it works itself to the front. But the cost benefit of putting money in shortline rail system is incredible, and it rings all the bells. So I'll stop there. If we do want to talk about how impactful 7X type spends are, and we're trying to filter for, we don't have money to do everything. What do we do to have the most impact? It's something that people just don't gravitate towards because they generally don't have a lot of knowledge about it. I'm here to help with that. So I'll stop there.
Well, we're thrilled you joined us today. So thank you so much for those comments. And the next section of the discussion will focus on challenges and opportunities. So, to the extent that you want to add some of your recommendations in there, if you can, expand beyond PCC to other shortline rail, like what does the state need in terms of kind of a vision around that? Or we'd love to hear some of your thoughts in that part of the poll as well. So other comments about what you put in here? I'll pause here for a second. I'm curious if anyone wants to speak any more about planning for growth, about how this plan can, transportation plan can or should interface with kind of land use decisions. So that's generally at the local and regional level, but it's important. It's a key part of the transportation, how efficient we can make the transportation system. It's related to land use. So any thoughts on how this plan can interact with the land use decisions that are happening at the local and regional level? Okay, well, we can come back to that. Other thoughts before we move on?
Jonathan, I think it was at this point in the meeting yesterday where I offered the comment that, over the past 20 years, we have had adequate transportation funding, or we've had transportation funding that enabled us to continue to invest, at all levels of government, state, regional, local. And we're sort of heading into a new day where increased collaboration and shared priorities are becoming much more important with the resources being constrained. And with that, I'll just stop and we can move into.
Follow. Okay, so next section is on challenges and opportunities. So again, this is mainly group discussion and input. So there'll be a couple of questions allowing you to provide feedback on what your local, regional, statewide transportation challenges and opportunities are. So start thinking about that while I kind of set some context. So this slide is a little bit hokey, right? But thinking back to those first questions about how much can change in a 20-year period, right? I was telling Anna, like this cell phone was basically the same cell phone I had in my first cell phone in 2003. So could be mine there. And here we have the Apple Vision Pro. I don't have one, but I'm wearing a headset now. We're all here on Zoom. So just communication has changed so much between 2000 and now. And obviously the pandemic sped up some of this, the virtual nature of our lives. So what will communication look like in the future, right? We have no idea, or we can guess. The same could be said about transportation. We could have a picture of an old sedan and a driverless Uber here. We've got micromobility, and we've got shared ride. We have all of these. We're still close to autonomous vehicles, right? We've been saying that for years now, but so much just changed in the transportation system in the last 20 years. And what's that going to look like in the future? And how do we plan strategies to prepare for that unknown future? So that's kind of why we're here. But we also want this plan to focus on what should happen in the near term. So we will be asking for challenges and opportunities over the next 20 years, but you can think about the immediate needs and how those might change over time. So before we ask those more detailed questions, just let's do a quick pulse check. What are your feelings about the future of transportation in Washington? Pick a word or two. Again, you can use it's the same Menti code. If you've joined late, you can find that link in the chat, or go to menti.com and type in the code 18245316. So this is, as expected, we're seeing kind of a mix of hope and concern, right? It's balanced. I like balance because it's got to be, you have to be hopeful, but recognize that there are big challenges ahead, that we need to plan for those challenges, and you know, bring about the kind of the future that we want. Okay, so you can keep submitting responses to this question as I present a couple more slides. So thank you for that quick pulse check. So we want to hear from you today. We want to hear about the near term and the long term challenges and opportunities. Here's how we're defining challenges and opportunities, but please, answer it how you see fit. So challenges can be thought of as external forces, may be outside of your control, that may keep the state or the region from reaching the transportation goals. So a switch to zero emission or non-combustion vehicles may reduce the gas tax revenue. What are some other challenges that your region's facing? Some opportunities. So the external forces that the state could be positioned to act and benefit upon. So what are the strategies if we roll out recommendations to take advantage of those opportunities to address the goals? Here's one: artificial intelligence technology, for all its potential problems, could make it easier to process data and address system deficiencies, tackle some of the biggest transportation challenges in terms of safety and mobility. So that could be an opportunity, could also be a challenge. So the state, we've been using the state in Washington interchangeably. I know some of you represent statewide agencies, but think about your constituents when you're answering these questions. Think about how the state's role in helping address some of those challenges as well. So before we get into that, I just wanted to note that we have talked to Lois and SRCT. We talked to Palouse, who's also on the call. We've talked to other MPOs throughout the state. These are some of the issues that we heard about in those initial conversations, and I'm curious if these resonate with you all as well. We have safety, we have maintenance and preservation, as was noted, equity, resiliency and redundancy, transition to clean energy, accommodating growth. So some of these have already come up in the comments. Some of these Lois alluded to in her opening remarks. But yeah, I'm really curious to hear what you all have to say about some of these issues and other challenges. So, the first question is about, in the next 20 years, what will the state's biggest transportation challenges be? So if Maddie, you want to go to the next question?
And even if you haven't joined Menti yet, you can jump in there right now. Just click the link in the chat or use the code above in the right corner of the slide.
You can also, if you're a panelist, you can also feel free to use the webinar chat and we can capture that feedback as well. And if you're an attendee, you can pose a question. You'll also be able to see that.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot on funding, which was to be expected. That was the sustainable funding was the highest priority and pillar. Think about what this gets a little bit into opportunities, but you know, is this funding coming from the state? Is this local funding? Is this for capital projects? Is this for maintenance and preservation? So put a little nuance to it. Obviously, lack of funding is the more times we hear that, the more we can emphasize it in the plan. So thank you for that. But you know, we also want to end up being specific with our recommendations. Maintaining the workforce, that's great. I'd love to hear that. So we also have balancing the demands of growing growth in the system with existing, absolutely. Shift of river traffic to rail, so kind of freight modal mode shift. Regulations that can create economic barriers.
Great to see the recognition of the workforce item that hasn't come up yet. That's great. Competing priorities, that's an important point.
Aligning our efforts to improve outcomes. So that's great. The local and regional collaboration, opportunities to maybe not package projects, maybe that's not the right term, but to yeah, to create those bundles of improvements that create co-benefits.
Are there any challenges related to being on the border with Idaho in this area, or you know, cross state things in the next 20 years that come to mind for people? Just trying to think of specific things to this region that may be nuanced.
You bring up a good point there, Anna. We do have coordination issues with the state in Idaho that we need to improve. And obviously, we're working under different goals that our states have, right? Washington State is very limited in expanding capacity and wanting to move to multimodal transportation. And our partners on the other side of the state aren't aligned with that goal. So I put in that alignment piece there that whether it's interstate or within our state, the alignment issue within our state could be around safety. We have a lot of different efforts going around at safety at the Transportation Commission and WashDOT. We're doing regional plans. Public health is involved. Enforcement is involved. How do we make sure we're all marching in the same direction and utilizing each other's efforts for maximum potential?
Thanks, Eve.
I'm probably
Does
the
anyone
only
wanna-
one I'm probably the only one that did this, but just learning from my mistake, a reminder to everyone, you have to hit skip ahead. I entered like 4 or 5 comments meant for this slide that actually posted to the last slide, so.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Yes, that is one tricky thing with the hitting skip ahead. Appreciate you sharing that tip with all.
Yeah, if it says skip ahead right above the, I think in this area up here in the top right corner of your screen, then please click that so you can answer on this particular slide. Does anyone want to speak to the kind of policy getting ahead of market and technology? I think that's a good point, and I think there's, you know, this is a policy plan, right? It's not recommending necessarily legislation, and so I think we're thinking of policy in the terms of, you know, maybe we can call them objectives. Like, this is sort of the objective that we want to create some recommendations around advancing this or that. And then what I'm reading from this is maybe, you know, regulations maybe preventing innovation. And so how can our policy or our objectives kind of support innovation, technology? Paul, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in there. The way I think about our multimodal system, and it's being in the grain industry, I'm very familiar with all modes of transportation. You know, barge system, trucking, rail. Clearly, that's why, you know, largely why I'm here. We have, you know, a multitude of industry. You know, I'm familiar with agriculture, but I also work with, you know, with a board in Spokane, and I've been the one mentioning preservation. The reason I mentioned that is, in order for it to be effective, you need to support the system that's already there, because the economy is already relying on something that is, you know, perhaps wearing out. And I think that's at least from my perspective, what I'm reading in a lot of these comments is we need to be able to support the system we have already. The reason you do that is to make sure that the economy that we have in place today still functions. And then what you can do from there is additive. So it's an all of the above approach. And I didn't write the policy getting ahead of the market in technology, but I think that's an interesting point. If we're trying to, you know, direct from the top down what we're supposed to look like, it doesn't ever function that way. At least, you know, not in our culture, because people are fine with checking a box that makes them feel good until it costs them their livelihood, and then they're going to resist. So first, start with how do we support the economy that's in place, without undermining it, because that's where the resistance comes from. And that's where the collaboration also comes from. I think it was Paula was mentioning something to the effect, I use pull the rope in the same direction a lot. So we're all, you know, we're all here because we're interested in the transportation network, and we all have our own perspective. But that's the way I think about it. You know, first and foremost is what is important to the economy today. And I think that, you know, that rings the equity bell, because, you know, I live in an area where we have tribes and, you know, workers that are coming, you know, over the border here in, you know, in Wenatchee. This is all important to everyone that comes here for the very reason that the economy is established already, relying on these transportation networks. So I caution folks that are trying to frame the direction based on policy and then forcing people that otherwise can't move in that direction. That puts them in economic distress, and then you start to see resistance.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. I think that there's some more to kind of parse out there, maybe in the opportunities section around collaboration, around funding, sort of, you know, a lot of this is about balancing competing priorities. So that could be an opportunity too, right? There's projects that are happening that can support preservation, but also, address some of these other issues. So I'd like to get into that a little bit more and the opportunities. Does anyone else want to share any thoughts on what they put in here, elaborate on what you've seen in terms of the challenges?
I just have one more quick thought, and it's related to some of the climate issues that I see popping up there. But more and more, we need to collaborate with the utilities, and this is an area where we haven't performed before. This is a new relationship for us. So just trying to learn that industry and realize how we can leverage each other's funding and opportunities is a challenge that I see us having, particularly with some of the grant opportunities that are coming out that are for local governments, but they do help the energy sector. So just a new relationship and new challenges around that as we move towards more sustainable transportation.
Great point, Eve. Thanks for that. Yesterday, we heard some discussion about collaboration with special districts like school districts and others, but the utilities hadn't come up. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think, and they were also talking about this sort of vehicle to grid. I mean, electric vehicles, obviously huge connection, but there was some conversation about electric vehicles being as part of kind of load balancing for utilities. And actually, it's funny you say that, Eve. When I was at the APA conference last fall in Spokane, someone from utility came up to me and said, "Oh, I listened to your presentation. Do utilities often come to these statewide plan conversations?" I said, "No, but they should, because there is a huge opportunity just in terms of projects that are being delivered to collaborate. And now with the sort of electrification, the decarbonization of everything, it's even more important." So that I had forgotten about that and appreciate the reminder.
I just want to belabor this point again. I think that is something that is going to need to be significantly different in terms of the way in which we have operated historically. I say we collectively, meaning we, whatever agency you're in, it has always been a more siloed approach where utilities did utility stuff and transportation did transportation stuff, and so on and so forth it goes. But more and more, the integration between industry sectors, agencies, that collaboration, that communication line needs to be clearer, simply because the system is changing so drastically in such a rapid pace that in order to really efficiently utilize the resources, because we've all mentioned funding and we all know that funding is a problem, but we also know we are not going to fully fund the system, right? That's never going to happen. And so we have to figure out ways to leverage each other's work that we're doing, be more efficient in delivery, be more coordinated, so that we can maximize the opportunity set that's out there. So I love that you all are talking about that. I love that we're starting to see some more of that collaboration, but we're going to have to get better about it. We're going to have to put the time and energy into making sure that we're doing it, and that we just know where to be, like where are the right places for us to be, because we can't be everywhere. But we need to start, creating those connections and building those networks out. So thank you all for bringing that up.
Thank you. Okay, I think let's move on to opportunities, and there's sort of a natural segue. We're already starting to think about some of the solutions, or not the solutions, but the opportunities. So keep on the Menti poll, and our team will kind of advance to the next question. So same question, just think now about the opportunities. What are some of those near term, longer term external forces that could help us if we're proactive, meet our transportation goals? Okay, definitely unsurprising. We're seeing sort of collaboration, developing partnerships. I think the technology, I think that's sort of maybe obvious that maybe it's not the highest priority, but definitely an opportunity to advance some of the other priorities. I like this, the AI coupled with Tismo, right? The operations to take maximization of existing infrastructure to the next level. So absolutely, we've been talking about smart cities for a long time, and I feel like it's now at the point where that could be more of a reality, where we can really maximize our transportation system across efficiency as well as all our other goals: safety, equity, sustainability. Alternative modes, technology, VMT reductions. So a safe systems approach as an opportunity for enhanced safety. Integrating land use and transition and the sort of denser development in urban areas. So some specific safety treatments, no turn on red policies, slowing urban traffic to reduce collisions with vulnerable users. Rail, both I would say passenger as well as freight rail could be an opportunity for mode shift. Okay, so we're going to keep this open. So please feel free to keep putting comments in the box here. Does anyone want to elaborate on something you put in here or comment on something else you've seen? How can the plan help address some of these? How can the Washington Transportation Plan address some of these opportunities or advance some of these priorities? While you're still entering, we love collecting all this written feedback. So it's okay if you don't want to verbally respond, because we've got it documented, and that's great for us. Makes our lives easy. But if you want to add any nuance to some of these comments, please do so. I have one other question I have is, if we look back to the last WTP or just in the last 6-8 years, where have you seen the most progress in addressing some of your challenges, and where we've heard from you about future challenges, but where has the most progress been made? What needs the most attention? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, this is one of those topics where it's the competing policies, which are both really important and really good, but because they came unfunded, actually are impacting the ability for DOT anyway to do preservation. And so specifically, policies that are opening the door for us to use funding we have for preservation projects to close gaps in the system, sidewalks and things, making urban areas safer and more equitable for people to get around. And that policy, as good as it is and as much as we support it, didn't come with money. And so the money comes from an already unfunded or underfunded preservation program, right? So I think that's, whether that fits into here or not, but you know, there's this opportunity to do really good things in many of these goal areas, but until the pie gets bigger, the slices are just getting smaller, right? Nothing's getting done the way it should.
Yeah,
Well-
I think that's a great comment, and I think it's what I'm hearing is two things, right? The pie getting bigger, and please, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but also just kind of the siloed nature of funding programs where you've got to spend it on preservation, or you've got to spend, and this goes from state funding also all the way to the federal government. There are eligible project types. So this gets to, you know, how can you develop projects in a way that either expand the funding eligibility or develop projects in a way that it addresses multiple goals or deficiencies. So it's a preservation project that also, you know, closes a gap in the system, or you make the case that it's so I think it's yes, expand the pie, but also expand the definition of maybe what these, expand the scope of the project or the definition of what's eligible for the types of funding. I'm not sure if that's,
Well,
I don't want to mischaracterize what you're saying.
no, but that's a good addition, John, to what I was saying, because I think because there's so much siloed funding, any organization that's going to fund a big project, right? That they have to put so much effort into applying to multiple funding sources, right? And create this package and, you know, get it's just so much that goes into it. All of that effort could be spent actually doing work on the system if it wasn't so complicated to go after you know, multiple sources of money, because the definition of how those sources can be used is so narrow, right? So that's a good thought, John, that you added.
Yeah, Lois.
Yeah, I appreciate Mike's comments, and that has come up before. You know, how we direct resources and the ability to access funding takes a tremendous amount of our energy. To just respond, Jonathan, to your question of where has there been a success, I think that technology, as it has evolved, certainly in the last most recent decade, has given us more tools in our toolbox, and that should help us be able to do what we do a little better, a little faster, a little more effectively, whether that's testing different land use scenarios, or understanding the demographics. You know, we've got a lot of data available to us now, which certainly would help us in our model forecasting, vehicle and infrastructure technology that is available to help with coordinated signals and safer operations, wayfinding. So again, I would say the ability to continue to leverage those tools are an area of hope and promise, for certainly.
Thank you. I'll pause here to see if there are other comments around, anyone want to talk about safety as an opportunity? We've got new approaches, system approach. We've got sort of some specific strategies. Yeah, Eve?
Yeah, again, I would just talk about alignment in the safety sector. Again, we have multiple partners addressing different things, right? We have behavioral issues, we have enforcement issues, we have engineering issues. So the opportunity for us to work more comprehensively together is going to be really important because those combined solutions are really going to drive better outcomes. You know, we can do a little bit in the engineering world, but unless we're doing the education and we're following up with enforcement, we're not going to see the type of impact that we want to have. So working more together in the safety realm is something we've identified that's really important, at least in our region and likely statewide.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, in terms of an opportunity and safety, I think it's pretty well documented that there is no greater societal return on investment than investing in safety. It's not necessarily glitzy, but even safety projects, when done well, can add capacity. But I'll just leave it at if we want to get the greatest return on our investment as a society, we should invest in safety.
I'll follow up Mike's comments there. Just an interesting factoid. So a loaded semi, or actually any semi, about every 1,000,000 miles a semi travels, there's a death. And I think it's 2.7. So sometimes it's a single person in a car, sometimes it's an entire family. Finding ways to remove semis from the general traffic flow is an immense benefit. So just my company, if you have a kind of a mental image of the state, you know, Wenatchee to Spokane, we're right in the center of the state. And the number of miles traveled, or, you know, if we were moving everything by truck, if we didn't have the rail, by example, we'd be putting 18 to 20,000 trucks per year on the road. Now we're not, because we're investing, you know, personally, company level, and at the state level in rail traffic. But I totally agree with Mike's comments. Anytime that an event like that happens, it shocks the you know the local communities and changes, you know, someone's lives forever. So I agree with that, and I also think that finding ways to get the modes of transportation self-sustaining again is also a key component. You know, we've doubled our state budget and are still struggling with funding. And part of that is we have answers to that if we can find self-sustaining mechanisms that pay for themselves, like river and rail transportation are good examples.
Thanks, Mike and Paul, I should say. Okay, we have a few minutes, and we'll definitely let you out a few minutes early. But I just wanted to maybe probe on a couple more topics, and anything else you want to chime in on, please do so. So one thing I noticed in the challenges, and what I'm seeing in challenges and opportunities is, you know, growth, you know, urban growth, and maybe that's rural growth as well, but also kind of the urban rural divide in the region. So does anyone want to kind of speak to or provide some more clarity on sort of what those challenges and opportunities might be related to the urban rural divide, as well as kind of concentrating growth in the urban areas?
I guess, John, I'm not sure completely where you were going there, but when I hear a conversation about urban and rural, I just tend to jump in and remind folks that all the rural areas provide us all with our food and our commerce and our exports, and we have to be really intentional about maintaining a sound transportation system to the rural parts of our state. And so I tend to speak up when a conversation may hit urban and rural against each other, because yeah, we can have all the growth and the things that come along with that in urban areas, but we all rely, even though we might not notice it every day, on what happens in rural areas.
Yeah, and I think
I'll add to Mike's comments real quick too, is some of the policy that we see at state and federal levels it assumes a one size fits all solution. And it clearly does not. And so when you bring up a topic like the rural urban divide, that's what it is. You know, largely people that live in rural communities think of themselves as independent and self-sufficient, but clearly not. You know, we're sharing a budget that's related to transportation or otherwise. But I would caution folks to think about policy in particular that puts already economically distressed communities under further duress. And so we're seeing a lot of those policies. I spend a fair amount of time, in energy, in Olympia, pointing that out. That's partially why I'm here. I don't know if there's anybody else that lives in a town of 1,200 on the call, but that's a big deal. And Mike's point that this is where our food comes from. That's a good point. There's folks that have been born, on pavement, and maybe their parents were too, and maybe their parents before them, and so we get further and further away from agriculture to our detriment. Just recognizing that that's where our food comes from, and the significant amount of exports that come from Eastern Washington in particular. And everybody on the call is from Eastern Washington, I think. So they understand it maybe, but not everybody in the state does. So I would remind folks to think about that when we're contemplating policy or policy changes. It's very impactful for people that you may have never met, but you rely upon every day.
thanks, Lois.
I'll just echo comments from Paul and Mike. The conversation that happens in our board and advisory committee meetings quite often is about the one size fits all solution that sometimes comes about, and awareness of the needs of rural areas versus more urban areas are important in maintaining that flexibility when it's possible. I think among the MPOs and RTPOs around the state, this conversation occurs as well, but it is framed more around equity and the haves and the have-nots. And quite often in rural areas, they have very few resources, very few staffing support, and making sure that rural areas are adequately resourced, not just in the projects themselves, but in the policies and the staffing and in the upfront planning, so that we can make good decisions, do all of those other things that we've talked about throughout this meeting. And when you are just very thinly staffed, it is very hard to exercise any of those opportunities that have been identified on this page and in other conversations. So it is in its base an equity issue as well.
Thank you. Okay, one final question, just looking at these opportunities and thinking back about the challenges. So do any of these, I guess, which of these should be focused on the short term, which are longer term? If you, as we're developing strategies and recommendations for near term, are some of these more short-term priorities or some of these longer-term priorities or opportunities? Let me ask it specifically. Which of these do you see as short-term, or are they all short-term priorities or opportunities? And you can use the chat if you feel more comfortable doing so.
Tough question, John. So many of them are important, and truly it's a balance, right? So I'll do my best to try to put one up top.
I'm not asking, yeah, and I don't want you to say, okay, this is our top choice, but I think some of these are perhaps more kind of, I don't like the word actionable, but something that the state could attempt to address in the next 2 to 5 years. Some of them are maybe more long term, but a lot of these seem like they are, to me at least, near term opportunities. But I don't want to presuppose anything. I mean, except maybe growth, kind of transportation, land use. Those are sort of longer term, or take a little bit more longer term planning. We are way behind, so most of these are near term or current issues. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so keep putting thoughts in the chat. And this quiz will remain open for a little while if you want to keep adding additional opportunities. We have a few wrap-up slides, and I really appreciate all your time. So we'll give a couple one slide on next steps for the WTP. We'll also offer an opportunity for anyone on the call to share any relevant project updates. We have a short update, a couple slides from the WashDOT intercity bus plan team that I'll show in a second. But so if you've got anything else you want to highlight about what's going on in your region, start thinking about what you might want to share. In terms of next steps for the WTP, we have 4 more regional meetings, including one tomorrow that's focused on Southwest Washington. I'll show you the website where you can go and register for additional meetings if you want to listen in on the conversation, add more commentary at those future meetings. We as a project team and the commission will be summarizing what we're hearing at these meetings, as well as some of the background research we've been doing, kind of distilling them into some of the priorities and developing strategies or refining strategies to address what we've heard in these meetings. We'll also host topic focused meetings, and those have not been set yet, but we're likely to focus on the policy pillars and really dig into some of the strategies that are bubbling to the top to address some of the pillars that we've presented today. So look out for information about those meetings, likely this summer. Again, we'll come back in early 2025 to talk about the recommendations for the plan before working on the final strategies. So is there anyone on the call that would like to share another planning or project update with the group? We've got a great collection of folks today, so I just wanted to offer that opportunity for anyone to share any updates. We've got someone from, okay, Patrick Lynch. I'll ask to unmute. Patrick, can you hear me? You should be able to unmute now. Patrick, I cannot hear you. Can anyone else hear Patrick?
No, I
He
cannot.
appears to be unmuted, yeah.
To be unmuted, do you want to upgrade Patrick to a panelist so he can speak, maybe? You should be able to
It-
speak even as
It
an
might
attendee.
be something with the settings, the audio settings.
There we go.
Okay, now Patrick, you should be able to mute and unmute.
There he is.
I'm still not hearing
We
Patrick.
we see you, but we don't hear you. It might be Zoom audio settings.
Could have multiple mics or something.
Now we hear you.
Can you hear it? Can we hear me now?
Yes.
There you
Okay,
go.
I got like 2 speakers. This is confusing. Sorry.
Patrick.
Zoom problems. So we had a couple slides on the intercity bus project that
Yeah.
I'm working on. So I don't know if you have, are those?
Yep, they're up.
So yeah, just quickly. So we're working with Washshot on updating the state's intercity bus plan, and we're just initiating the project now. So I guess what's of interest to this group is that we'll be doing a pretty in-depth engagement throughout the project. We're just kind of getting started with that now, and this project has a fairly condensed schedule. I mean, we're hoping to have a final plan by the end of the year, and most of the work completed by kind of, early fall even. So throughout kind of the spring and early summer, we'll be reaching out to this group and other groups across the state and getting your input. And for those that aren't familiar with kind of what, when we refer to like intercity busing, it's essentially rural transit kind of connecting, different rural communities throughout the state. And so, yeah, more to come on that. I think we had a second slide on next step. So, we'll be reaching back out to this group, with some questions. So, I mean, what I would just, tell this group, we wanted to raise awareness of the project, and that we'll be touching base with you again, as we move forward. So that's really all I have.
Thanks, Patrick. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Paula.
Thank you. So anyone else want to provide an update, a project or planning update? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. Thank you especially to Lois and Eve from SRTT for for helping to organize this and get the word out about it. It was a really, really great conversation. We really appreciate everyone providing input on the polling questions. So if you want to register for any additional meetings, you can go to the Commission's website there, wstc.wa.gov, and you can find the Washington Transportation Plan site. And yeah, we look forward to staying in touch, and thanks again for your input. Have a great rest of your day.